The late afternoon sun bathed the Williams backyard in a golden glow, casting long, warm shadows across the freshly mowed lawn. Diane Williams, matriarch of the family, stood at the grill with a pair of tongs in hand, flipping marinated chicken wings that sizzled and popped over the charcoal. The rich aroma of barbecued meat and seasoned vegetables mingled with the sweet scent of freshly baked cornbread cooling on a nearby table. Diane glanced around and smiled, her heart swelling with pride and joy. "It's perfect," she murmured, brushing a stray curl from her face with her shoulder. Robert Williams, her husband, stood nearby, adjusting the portable speaker, blasting soulful tunes that floated across the yard. Their daughter, Jasmine, and son, Tyler, raced around with a group of kids from the neighborhood, their laughter punctuating the air like music. Diane could see neighbors trickling in, plates and drinks in hand, engaging in warm handshakes and introductions. "Diane, this is incredible," said an older woman named Betty, balancing a bowl of potato salad. "It's been years since anyone hosted a proper get-together like this." Diane chuckled. "It's about time, then. We want everyone to feel like family here." Betty nodded approvingly, while her husband, Frank, wandered over to the food table. Most of the neighbors seemed genuinely pleased to be there, chatting with Robert about the local schools and swapping gardening tips. From across the street, behind lace curtains, Mrs. Ethel Grayson watched the scene unfold, her thin lips pressed tightly together. Ethel had lived in the neighborhood for over 30 years, priding herself on maintaining the area's quiet and respectable reputation. When the Williams family moved in 3 months ago, she had convinced herself they wouldn't last long. "Just look at them," she muttered under her breath, glaring at the diverse crowd enjoying the barbecue. "They're turning this place into a circus." Ethel peeked at the clock and frowned. The music wasn't too loud yet. The children weren't being too rowdy yet. But the sight of so many people laughing and chatting freely in her neighborhood made her blood boil. She had never had a problem with their kind, as she liked to claim, but she believed certain unspoken rules should be followed. She turned her attention back to the festivities just in time to see Diane laughing as she handed a neighbor a plate. To Ethel, Diane's confidence and warmth were infuriating. Ethel gripped her phone tightly, muttering, "This is getting out of hand." Outside, Jasmine, a bright and bubbly 10-year-old, ran up to her mother with a friend in tow. "Mom, Mrs. Harper says your ribs smell better than the ones from the diner downtown." Diane laughed. "Well, you tell Mrs. Harper that's because mine are made with love." Meanwhile, Tyler, a lanky teenager who had just entered high school, was teaching some younger kids how to throw a football. His father, Robert, watched proudly, occasionally tossing in pointers. "See? This is what community looks like," Robert said, clapping a neighbor on the back. "No barriers, no walls, just good food and good people." Ethel's voice hissed in her ear as she dialed 911. "Yes, officer. I'd like to report a disturbance. There's a loud party happening in my neighborhood. It's completely out of control, and I'm concerned for our safety." She hung up and peered out the window, satisfied that order would soon be restored. The barbecue was in full swing when the distant wail of sirens pierced the jovial atmosphere. Heads turned toward the street as a squad car rolled to a stop in front of the Williams home. Diane's smile faltered as she noticed 2 uniformed officers stepping out, their hands resting cautiously on their belts. "Mom," Jasmine whispered, clutching her mother's apron. "Why are the police here?" "It's okay, baby," Diane said, her voice calm but firm. "Stay with your dad." Robert stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Jasmine's shoulder as Diane approached the officers. The chatter among the guests quieted, and the festive mood gave way to unease. "Good evening, officers," Diane said with a polite smile. "How can we help you?" One of the officers, a younger man with a tight expression, glanced around the yard before responding. "Ma'am, we received a noise complaint about a disturbance. Can you tell us what's going on here?" Diane raised an eyebrow but kept her composure. "We're hosting a barbecue for our neighbors. Everything here is within city ordinances, music volume, guest count, and all. There's no disturbance." Before the officer could reply, Ethel appeared at the edge of her property, arms crossed and lips pursed. "I called you," she declared, her voice sharp. "These people have been causing a ruckus for hours. It's disruptive, and I won't stand for it." Diane turned to face Ethel, her expression still calm, but her voice carrying an edge. "Mrs. Grayson, with all due respect, we're celebrating with our neighbors. There's no harm in children laughing and music playing." Ethel sniffed. "Well, I disagree. This neighborhood has always been peaceful, and now it feels like a carnival." The younger officer exchanged a glance with his partner, an older man with a more measured demeanor. "Ma'am," the older officer said, addressing Ethel, "we need to investigate whether there's an actual violation here." "There's no need to investigate," Ethel snapped. "Just shut it down." By now, the guests were murmuring among themselves, some stepping closer to show support for the Williams family. Betty, the older neighbor who had earlier complimented Diane, stepped forward. "This is ridiculous," Betty said, her voice firm. "The Williams family has been nothing but welcoming. There's no disturbance here, and you know it, Ethel." Ethel shot Betty a glare, but said nothing. The officers appeared uncertain, caught between a baseless complaint and a visibly peaceful gathering. "Officers," Diane said, her tone unwavering, "you're welcome to look around and see for yourselves. We're doing nothing wrong." Just as the younger officer began to speak, a sleek black car pulled up, and the murmurs of the crowd grew louder. A woman stepped out, her tailored pantsuit striking a balance between casual and commanding. Her presence was magnetic, and as she approached, her confident stride seemed to carry authority. "Mayor Martinez," one of the guests whispered, surprised. Sophia Martinez, the mayor of the town, surveyed the scene before locking eyes with Diane. A wide smile broke across her face as she extended her arms. "Diane Williams," she exclaimed, pulling Diane into a warm embrace. "It's been too long." The crowd watched in stunned silence as the two women exchanged greetings. Ethel's face paled, her usual composure faltering. "Madam Mayor," the older officer said, stepping forward, "we're responding to a noise complaint." Sophia turned to him, her expression softening, but her voice firm. "Officers, I can assure you there's no issue here. In fact, I was invited to this barbecue myself." She then addressed the crowd. "Let's not let one person's discomfort ruin a beautiful event. This community thrives on connection, and the Williams family has clearly brought us together today." Sophia's words rippled through the crowd, drawing smiles and nods of agreement. Ethel, however, remained rooted in place, her jaw tightening as the mayor's gaze fell on her. "I'd like a word with you, Mrs. Grayson," Sophia said, her tone leaving no room for refusal. Ethel swallowed hard, realizing she had just picked a fight she couldn't win. The mayor's arrival shifted the atmosphere, and the officers, no longer needed, exchanged a few polite words with Diane before leaving. Guests returned to mingling, their spirits lifted by the mayor's speech and her implicit support for the Williams family. For Diane, the moment was bittersweet. As she looked around at the neighbors who had come to their defense, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. But she also knew this wasn't the end of the challenges her family might face in their new community. "Thank you, Sophia," Diane said quietly, watching the mayor approach Ethel. "You have no idea what this means to us." Sophia placed a reassuring hand on Diane's shoulder. "Diane, this is just the beginning. Change doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with moments like these." As the barbecue continued, the Williams family's warmth and resilience shone brighter than ever, a beacon of hope and unity in a neighborhood learning to embrace its diversity. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting a soft amber glow over the Williams' backyard, but the tension in the air was palpable. As Mayor Sophia Martinez approached the barbecue, her presence drew every eye. Dressed in tailored khaki pants and a crisp white blouse, her demeanor balanced casual warmth with undeniable authority. She surveyed the scene, quickly locking eyes with Diane, who stood near the grill, her shoulders squared, but her hands trembling slightly. "Sophia," Diane said, her voice breaking into a relieved smile. Sophia returned the smile, her own radiating a genuine affection. "Diane Williams, it's been too long." They embraced like old friends, reuniting after years apart, and for a moment, the weight of the confrontation seemed to lift. The mayor turned to the gathering, addressing the neighbors who had paused mid-conversation to watch the unfolding scene. "For those who don't know, Diane and I grew up together in Belmont Heights. Sophia began, her voice carrying over the quiet murmurs of the crowd. And let me tell you something. This woman embodies grace, kindness, and resilience. Ethel Grayson, who had remained rigid at the property line, scoffed audibly. Sophia's sharp gaze snapped toward her. Mrs. Grayson, Sophia said, her voice now edged with steel. I'm told you're the one who called the police. Care to explain why? Ethel straightened her back, her lips pursed. This event is disruptive. Loud music, children running amok. It's not the kind of atmosphere we've worked to maintain here. Sophia arched a brow, folding her arms. Interesting. Loud music and children's laughter don't seem like disturbances to me. They seem like signs of community. She took a step closer to Ethel. You know, I've heard about your complaints before. The Rodriguez family down the street told me about the time you reported their teenage son for looking suspicious while walking his dog. Or how about the Johnsons, who couldn't put up Christmas lights without you calling the HOA about unauthorized decorations? Ethel's face turned scarlet. I don't see how that's relevant. Oh, it's relevant, Sophia said, her voice rising slightly. Because it shows a pattern of targeting families who don't look like you, and I won't stand for it, not in this town. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Diane watched, her heart pounding with a mixture of awe and gratitude. Sophia took a deep breath, softening her tone as she turned back to the group. Let me tell you something personal, she began. I grew up as a Latina kid in a predominantly white town not far from here. My parents worked tirelessly to give me and my siblings a good life, but no matter how hard we tried, there were always people who looked at us like we didn't belong. I remember my mother crying because someone left a note on our door saying our kind should go back where we came from. I remember the humiliation of being followed in stores, the whispers when we spoke Spanish in public. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. But you know what kept us going? The kindness of neighbors who stood by us, who invited us into their homes and made us feel welcome. That's what real community is about. Not exclusion, not fear, but unity and love. The crowd was silent, many visibly moved. Even some of the more reserved neighbors nodded in agreement. Sophia gestured toward Diane and Robert, who stood together, their children at their sides. The Williams family is exactly what this neighborhood needs. They represent the future, a future where we embrace diversity, not shun it. Sophia turned to the officers who had been quietly observing the exchange. Officers, thank you for responding, but as you can see, there's no violation here. I'd ask that you head back to your post and let this family enjoy their evening. The older officer nodded, tipping his hat to Diane before motioning to his partner. They returned to their squad car and drove away, leaving a wave of relieved murmurs in their wake. Sophia then faced Ethel one last time. Mrs. Grayson, you're welcome to stay and join the barbecue, but if you can't accept the idea of a vibrant, inclusive community, maybe this isn't the right neighborhood for you anymore. Ethel opened her mouth to retort, but thought better of it. Instead, she turned on her heel and marched back to her house, slamming the door behind her. The crowd broke into applause, and Diane felt tears welling in her eyes as Sophia returned to her side. You didn't have to do that, Diane said quietly. Yes, I did, Sophia replied, because standing up to people like her is how we make change. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the yard in the warm glow of string lights strung between trees, the barbecue resumed with renewed energy. The earlier tension had given way to laughter and camaraderie, as neighbors who had been hesitant at first now mingled freely. Mayor Martinez stayed, chatting with guests as she sampled Diane's famous ribs and cornbread. Jasmine and Tyler ran around with their friends, their joy undimmed by the earlier confrontation. Robert manned the grill, flipping burgers with a newfound lightness in his step. Diane watched it all unfold, her heart full. She turned to Sophia, who stood beside her with a plate in hand. You know, Diane began, when we moved here, I wasn't sure we'd ever feel at home. But tonight gives me hope. Sophia smiled. That's what community is about. It's not perfect, but moments like this push us closer to what it can be. Meanwhile, Ethel sat alone in her darkened living room, peering out the window at the celebration she had tried to ruin. For the first time, she felt a pang of something unfamiliar. Shame. She heard the faint echoes of laughter and music and realized how isolated she had made herself. Back at the barbecue, Betty stood with a small group of neighbors, discussing what had happened. "You know," she said, "I think this is a wake-up call for all of us. If we want a better neighborhood, we need to be better neighbors." Her words were met with nods of agreement. Conversations turned to stories of inclusivity and kindness, sparking a shift in perspective for many. As the night wore on, Diane and Sophia found themselves sitting together on the porch, reminiscing about their shared past. "Remember when you used to bring me tamales from your mom's kitchen?" Diane asked, laughing. Sophia grinned. "And you'd trade me your dad's peach cobbler? Those were the days." They fell into a comfortable silence, watching the party wind down. "You know," Sophia said finally, "this is just the beginning. What happened tonight won't fix everything, but it's a start." Diane nodded. "And we'll keep pushing forward, together." As the last guests departed and the Williams family began cleaning up, the barbecue stood as a symbol of something far greater than a neighborhood gathering. It was a testament to resilience, the power of unity, and the possibility of change when good people stand together against prejudice. For the Williams family, it wasn't just a barbecue, it was a new beginning. Thank you for joining us on this heartfelt journey of courage, compassion, and change. Today's story reminds us that standing against prejudice is never easy, but it's always worth it. It's about finding strength in community and choosing unity over division, no matter the odds. If this story inspired you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and tell us how it moved you. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss another story that challenges the mind and uplifts the soul. Before you go, let us know where you're tuning in from. We're so grateful to have listeners from all around the world. Until next time, stay hopeful, stay united, and always strive to make a difference